Do you ever worry that your kid isn't able to adjust to certain situations or has really big reactions to things that don't really feel aligned? If you're nodding your head, then we've got some fantastic news for you. Today on the podcast, we have Rachel Bailey, a parenting specialist for kids with big emotions. And she is dishing out 3 super practical tips that you can start using today. And the best part is that these tips actually help your kids' self-esteem in the process. You're listening to the How We Get Thru podcast, a place for you to feel connected through deep and meaningful conversations to help you continue to grow and heal. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder and CEO of the How We Get Thru app. My mission is to bring you affordable and diverse therapy resources to help you get through all the hard stuff, all in one place and at your own pace. Welcome to the How We Get Thru community. All right, welcome back. Today's guest is Rachel Bailey. She's a parenting specialist who's been serving families for over a decade. Besides being a mother of 2, she also has a master's degree in clinical psychology, a certification in positive discipline, and she has provided services as an ADHD coach, an in-home mentor, and a therapist. Through her podcast, programs, and services, Rachel teaches parents hands-on tools, and I'm one of them, for raising resilient, confident children and bringing flexibility, peace, and connection to families. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yes, this is so exciting. Okay, so we like to start off every series with our new contributors or therapists that come on the podcast with a mental health myth, and we'd love to know yours.
Yeah, so I would say that one of my big passions is teaching kids and adults to be more resilient. And I think that the myth is that resilience comes from just, shoving our kids into difficult situations. So we're not being those helicopter parents. We're making them do uncomfortable things. And we're, often because of our own parenting, telling our kids that in order to be more resilient, they should just toughen up and, they have to learn that life is hard. And to me, that is such a big myth because we can absolutely foster resilience. That's what I teach. But we don't do it just by shoving kids into difficult situations or telling them that they need to be stronger. We actually have to teach them how to respect their feelings, and sometimes this feels hard, and teach them not to let those feelings control them.
Oh, that's so good because I think I think our generation is kind of shifting that a little bit, but there is that piece that still gets passed down of in order to be resilient, you have to go through something hard and get on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe sometimes parents are focused on the other side.
Yes.
Versus getting through it.
That's exactly right. And that's why I love that you talk about how we get through, because that is actually the most important piece is how do you get through that difficulty? Because that's going to be the difference between resilience and not, is what we do during the discomfort. So I love how you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we'd love to know more about your journey in resilience. Is that something that you have personally gone through? You're also a parent. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, definitely. So I currently help parents of kids with what I call big emotions. So this means kids who, I'm going to use some terms that are what people usually call them. So I'm going to put these kind of in quotes, but kids with big emotions tend to be quote unquote sensitive. So they get really upset maybe if people are arguing or if they do something wrong. Kids with big emotions may be kids who are anxious, feeling, uncertain and really uncomfortable when things are new or don't go the way they imagine. And also strong-willed kids fall under big emotions. So, kids who, whenever you ask them to do something, they tend to push back or negotiate or complain. What's underneath all of this, all of these kids feel things strongly, and these differences are just differences in how they cope with these feelings. So all that to say is I have lots of experience with this. I myself am a textbook, I fit all the check boxes of a highly sensitive person. And I grew up not knowing why I was so different from my siblings and the rest of my family. So I grew up having big feelings and doing things differently and wondering what was going on with me and what was wrong with me. Then I also have 2 kids who both have big emotions, and they show it so differently. One of my kids is the more quote unquote strong-willed type. The other's the more sensitive type. So this plays a role in my life. It always has. And then also when I was a therapist, I was mostly working with adolescents with things like anxiety and self-harm behavior and, just a lot of kind of scary behaviors. And what I found was underneath a lot of these kids was really big feelings and not feeling good about their ability to handle these feelings. So such a huge role both in my professional and my personal life.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So like highly sensitive person, HSP, is like kind of all the rage right now, or has been building up over the last few years. Could you kind of name your experience of what that felt like for you? Because it just feels like sometimes these things that we struggle with then almost become like our superpower and something that we're really, super excited about in helping other people.
Yeah. And I will say that's what makes me good at my job, is being a highly sensitive person. But it also means that as a highly sensitive person, I have to take more breaks than other people, maybe. So like, I would wonder as a kid why my brothers could go on and they didn't need to take a break in the middle of the day. And now I know that's because highly sensitive people, we process things deeply. Our nervous system is actually a little bit different. So that takes a toll on our bodies. And so we do need to take breaks throughout the day. And, there are differences in how we function. So being highly sensitive also allows me to feel other people, although empathy is a little bit different. But I feel other people. I feel energy in the room. When I'm talking perhaps to some parents, maybe I'm talking to couples and there are two parents there, I can really understand each person's perspective really well and help them see what they're going through. So there are a lot of benefits to being a highly sensitive person, but there are some differences that as a highly sensitive person, we will notice. I don't love small talk. I like going deep into conversations, and a lot of people aren't like that. So I always, like I said, felt different, but it also became, like you said, my superpower for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I love how you brought up energy, because I think that's something that I'm working with also. And we do that as like in the helping profession for sure. It's like the boundaries of that, right? But also like what is life-giving and what isn't. And that sensitivity to other people's energy, I think also as a parent, when you're so sensitive to your kids' energy, that it becomes this like meshing of. And I think it's really hard for parents that are highly sensitive or just more sensitive in general. And I think a lot of parents just want to do well by their kids. Like, like we just want the best for our kids. And sometimes, if not all the time, it's how do we do right by ourselves that then can help our children.
Exactly right. And I would say the large majority of the parents I work with are either sensitive or anxious or, just feelers.
Yes.
So yeah, it can be, we want to do right by our kids, but it can be hard because especially if we're not aware of how much our energy is affected by our kids' energy. I will tell you, when my daughter is doing her homework and she gets frustrated and she gets that frustrated energy, I mean, it's like a wave that comes at me. I can feel it so strongly. And unless you know how to recognize that and know what to do with it, you just get sucked into that wave and you jump into that, choppy water right with them. And we want to do right by our kids, but we don't know how to help ourselves, which we have to do first. And then we don't know how to help our kids. So that's part of what I do, is help parents help themselves and then help their kids.
Yes. And you're so good and you've helped me and I really appreciate it. So
Thank you.
Can you let me know, I'm just curious, what is your reaction when you get in the wave of your kids?
Yeah.
Like, do you respond and do you get angry? Do you get frustrated? Are you anxious?
I pull away. If I'm not using all the skills that I teach other people, because it does not come naturally to me, I just pull back. That's exactly what I do. What do you do?
I anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's fight or flight. You're the fight, I'm the flight.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But I love that we can talk about it, because I think there's such, even though the reaction, there's like a pattern here. It's like parent and child, but our reactions are so unique to us.
100%.
Right? And there's no shame in, even though we might hold shame of like, oh man, I wish I walked away instead of going in, or I wish I went in instead of going. It is what it is. And so I just think it's a really interesting perspective that the anger for me is what I have to focus on, like regulating that for me.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying about, we have to have compassion for that, because ultimately resilience comes from compassion for our initial reaction. We can't change our reaction if we don't understand it and really, and do this for ourselves and for our kids. So instead of saying, oh, I wish I hadn't gotten so angry, it's, wow, I got angry. What was going on for me that led me to get angry? And if we want to do something different, we have to start there, and we have to start there with our kids as well.
Yes, which I think is a very good point, because I think as parents, we try to change the emotion.
Yeah.
instead of recognizing it and moving through it, right? We're like, well, I just can't get angry anymore. Like
Yes.
it's like, and that is literally impossible for me. I don't know if you know anything about astrology, but I'm like all fire signs or something. I don't know. Which really just helped me a lot with my anger. But I am just so quick. I'm just like hot, and it's
Absolutely
in me, you know?
Exactly right. And one of the things I talk about is, and I talk about in the course, is how if we try to change who we are, it actually affects our self-esteem. And so we don't want to do that to ourselves, and we don't want to do that to our kids. That's what most of us do to our kids. We try to change their emotions. And then what they learn is there's something wrong with me, or there's something bad about me. And that's not what we want to do. We actually want to understand our emotions. And as I was saying before, just not let it control us, but we have to understand it and respect it first.
Yeah. Which is such a mirroring moment for both parent and child, right? Because as parents, I'm still learning to accept my anger, you know, and accept these pieces of me. And I'm just curious too, I mean, what was your experience like how did you get parenting in being a highly sensitive person? And how do you think that kind of shaped you for today?
Meaning, how does being a highly sensitive person affect my parenting? Is that what you mean?
Growing up, how did your parents respond to you? Yeah, I know. And then we'll chat about.
That's an even bigger, better question.
Yes.
So first of all, I have the best parents in the world. I just have to put it out there.
Yes.
But they did not understand being a highly sensitive child. So basically what I learned was, if you have a feeling, walk away, take your feeling with you, get better, and come back when you're chipper and positive. That's what I learned. And as a highly sensitive person, that's not how it works. So I definitely learned, stuff your feelings, don't put them around people, don't have them really. And the best person is the person who is happy and positive all the time. So that definitely impacts, this is one of the things I teach, is that it impacts now how we see our kids. So that gets wired into us. And so if I see my child having a big emotion without even realizing it, my brain's going to go danger, danger, because of what I learned. Same thing is going to happen to all of us.
Yeah. Is that more like what they said, like go to your room when you're having emotion, like leave, be by yourself kind of vibe?
It was go to your room, but it was also anytime, maybe my emotion wasn't a big one, but it was like, so highly sensitive people, and I definitely do this, tend to go to the negative first. And I explain why that is. We could talk about that if you want to, but my brain goes to the negative first all the time. And so it was always think more positively. Why are you looking at it this way? You should look at it that way. And when I didn't look at it more positively and it got me more upset, which it does and which it will do for our kids, then it was, you're getting too upset. You need to take a break. You need to that was a big one. You're upset, take a break, like go away. So it was not only go away to begin with, but even when I started small, it was, I don't like that you're being negative. So you need to change that, change who you are, be more positive, and then come back and talk to me.
Yes. Oh, I have a different experience growing up, but I want to kind of relate that to my daughter currently, which I think for parents is it could be around the same issue where they're negative. And I think for my daughter, it's like there's not enoughness for her.
Yeah.
So if her brother has something, but she also got something, it is like, why? And then it's like tears. There was like mail the other day, and it's like, oh, here's your mail, and it's a magazine. It's like some junk mail. And her brother got it, and she's like, I wanted it, and just like engulfed her.
You know what happens too is that's usually a need to know that we matter. Like when someone else gets more of something, they must matter more than I do.
Yeah.
And so kids who feel strongly are not only more sensitive to things like that to begin with, but they get the message sometime. And I'm not saying your daughter did, because I'm not even sure, but a lot of us
I'll
get
tell
the
you what I did.
A lot of us get the message that we don't matter, and we get this because we're told you're too big, your emotions are too much. So then there's this combination of, I'm getting the message I don't matter, and I feel that super strongly because I'm a sensitive person. And then that comes into, I want that piece of mail. So all of that's happening inside without our awareness.
Yes. And I think from a parent's perspective, when it's a similar thing, it can kind of wear on you. And we have to be really careful of the category that we put that in. Like, don't be so selfish, or you get everything, or you try to justify it, right? And I think that's like such a dangerous territory. But again, like a common fault, I think, for parenting of like, I give you everything. What do you mean, But it is just like what I've learned. And for my own self too is I have to detach a little bit or I'll get angry, but we just let it ride. We let it ride. I don't tell her to go in her room. I don't tell whatever, but it's just interesting how you can see the patterns. And then sometimes, and I think you talk about this a lot too, as parents, we try to prevent big things from happening. You know, you're like, and then you get mad on yourself, like, I should have known. I should have known that. I should have given her another piece of mail because now we have this thing.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like this, around parents, like sweet heart to do good, we're trying to manage or prevent something from happening, an emotion, an actual experience of the world that they have uniquely.
Absolutely. And that's because one of the things I'm going to talk about when I go into tips, that's because we see their emotions as bad or threats.
Yeah.
And often in our defense, and you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, Jen, is that we're exhausted. We do so much for our kids. I call this like lots of withdrawals are happening because we're doing so much and we're not getting those deposits back. So often we see this as a threat, not even just because of what they're doing, but because we're exhausted. And like to your point, if this happens over and over and over. So that's why it's so important for us to have compassion for ourselves, give ourselves what we need so that we don't get triggered just because we're exhausted from having to deal with this. Because we don't want to give them the message that that experience is bad or wrong, but we can't do that when we're depleted ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. And this idea of like big emotions, kids with big emotions, how did you like conceptualize that? How did you kind of come up with that term? Like, how did you go from therapist and why did you be like, I'm not doing that anymore. I want to be a coach? Because we've all been there.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So the phrase, actually, I didn't make up. I use that phrase because that's what I kept hearing from parents.
Beautiful.
Was my kids have big emotions. So I actually didn't, I call them more deep feelers or deeply feeling people. But, when I am trying to help people feel understood, I use the language big emotions. And what happened was I was a therapist and I was working mostly with, like I was saying, adolescents who had lots of sort of symptoms through their behavior because you and I know that behavior is symptoms. And so I would help them with this and they'd make some progress, but then I'd send them home and they'd tell me what was happening at home. And I was realizing, this is before I was a parent myself, oh my goodness, parents are so good-hearted and well-intentioned and they have no idea what's going on and what they're doing that's actually making this worse. So at that point, I was like, I need to do parenting workshops. This is, again, before I was a parent. And then I fell in love with working with parents. And I said, wow, I can have an impact on the entire home if I work with parents. So I stopped doing therapy. And this was maybe 13 or 14 years ago now. I shifted to parenting and I have just been in love with doing that ever since.
Yes. And for people that are listening, like being a therapist is great, but it has a lot of like barriers in what you can kind of do with it. And so coaching kind of really opens up a whole different world and you can reach people out of your state and it just is more flexible. So
it is. And my model is not a therapy model. I'm very much, I'm going to consult with you. I'm going to tell you what to do. Therapy is processing. I don't process very much. I give advice. I give tips. I help you figure out what's working and what's not. So it is really, I'm not doing, as you know, this as a therapist, you can't really give advice. I give advice all the time. So like I'm not a therapist anymore. Yeah.
Yes. But I think it's helpful coming from that background. And it sounds like you saw just a big gap, a huge gap where I think therapy, a lot of parents are like, okay, my kid's having this, I'm going to throw them into therapy. And we're grateful that people are going to therapy. But when it's a kid, it's a whole family thing. It's a system thing. It's a unit thing. And that's hard. That is hard. So
yeah.
Yes.
But it's true. It is so true that you can, changing one, we know this about family systems, changing one is going to change everything and get resistance from other people. So even when I teach resilience skills and emotional skills, I say to parents, do this with your entire family. I want everyone, I'm teaching you, I want you to do this with your entire family because that's how it works, honestly.
Yes.
Everyone and your parents know the language and know the skills. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Fun for the whole family.
That's right.
What I would say. Yeah. So how did when becoming a parent, how did that switch for you? Even talking about like HSPs, like, do you feel like it's nurture versus nature? Is there some component? Did you feel like one of your parents were sensitive, but maybe were kind of taught out of it?
100%.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah. So I have my dad is very, very sensitive, biggest heart in the world. He was in the medical profession, and he actually was one of the first people to bring kids who were in the hospital long term because they had pulmonary issues and issues home. He had this big project and worked with who became the Surgeon General of the United States on this project because he had such a big heart, but he was told to squash it. And as an adult, I did not know this as a kid, but as an adult, I see the impact of him learning to squash his big, huge heart. So that affected me for sure, especially as I got older and went into the field of psychology. And then my kids, honestly, I say that I'm so grateful that they have lots of emotions because they help me stay humble as I'm doing this job. I'm not saying my house is so great and everything. No, my kids have anxiety and they're sensitive so I'm so grateful that I'm able to go on this journey with other parents that I work with.
Yeah. I think that's so key. Your dad has such a sweet story.
Oh, my dad's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, I'm curious of what you think as far as like big emotions or highly sensitive kids and maybe some categories of like being male or female. Like, is it impacting males more than females?
I would say that I don't know the numbers. I mean, I see in my practice, I see both, and I'd have to look at the research. But what I will say is how we deal with males versus females who are sensitive, I think is very different. Just culturally, obviously, men are not supposed to have feelings. It's not acceptable. I think that's changed again in our generation a lot from our parents' generation, but there's still that, if there's, I talk a lot about future fears we have when we have kids with big emotions. There's still that fear that if I don't teach them how to be less dramatic, they will be miserable. They won't have friendships. They won't have relationships. So there's definitely that gender bias that I see a lot more. Like I see more panic probably in parents of boys than I do in parents of girls.
Wow. I mean, I have a girl and a boy, and I would say they sound similar to your kids, where there's like CEO, I forgot what you said. The one's sensitive and one is
strong-willed.
Strong-willed. Yes, that's it. And my boy is the sensitive one. And I think I read, I don't know, it's probably a TikTok somewhere. But by the age of 5, like they start to like obviously become more self-aware and a lot of information around their own emotions that can be really harmful. And so I just think it's really important of like identifying the gender bias around big emotions.
I agree.
And how healing it can be for males, and how that, and when we heal our males, it can be healing for females too. Like this, and I know we're talking about male and female, but I think more of in just like the male energy and feminine energy that we both have within ourselves. But yeah, I think it's, I love how you named the panic for boys. Like, oh no, he's gonna like get made fun of, or he can't control, or he's not like masculine enough. I don't even know what it is, but it's like this fear that you're losing control when it's just a child who's expressing something.
Exactly. Oof. And I think about how my own dad would have been different, honestly, had that been acceptable. But he's, a generation back, and it really was not acceptable for a boy to be, less, to show their emotions, to feel, and then to show it and express it. So, I mean, we're one of my favorite things, the thing that I'm most grateful about doing what I do for a living is we are breaking generational cycles. Yes. We are changing patterns, and it's not easy, but we're doing it. And I feel so grateful to be any tiny little part of generational change.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. So in your program, can you talk a little bit about your program, how long it is, and like what are you teaching in that?
Yeah. So I actually have a membership. I switched from it was a group program, and then I switched to a membership because what I found is that the group program was 3 months long. And at the other 3 months, people were saying, this was great. What else? I need, and there was a lot of review that helps it go better if you just are, because this is going against our instincts. So when parents were reviewing it, they were doing better. So I said, okay, I'm going to change to a membership model, because then people can stay as long as they need to, repeat as much as they want. It's much more financially accessible. And what I teach are basically 3 pillars in that program. I teach, number 1, how do we regulate ourselves and diffuse drama? I call this actually becoming a powerful, positive influence with our kids so that we can help them calm down, so that we can help, them not see us as a threat as soon as we walk towards them, and that we can work together with them. So it's the first part is really about us. Then the two other pillars are setting limits effectively with kids with big emotions, because usually when you have a strong-willed child, they push back. When you have a sensitive child, they get really upset when you tell them they've done something wrong. So how do we set limits? And then the last piece is how do we foster resilience so they can handle uncomfortable feelings effectively? So it's us setting limits and then emotional resilience.
Yes, I love that. I think that's a really important part of setting limits, because I think that feels like a common misconception of gentle parenting, where you're not setting any limits. Did you tell me this?
It very likely, because it is the case. That's what a lot of people think. It may have been someone else, but I've heard this a lot too. Yeah. And so, and then that makes us feel out of control also as a parent. Yes, and it's not good for kids to not set limits.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's that's why I call it being a powerful positive influence. So I basically say there are two things that make a powerful positive influence. One is being strong and setting those limits and being confident. And I actually teach parents how to get to that place. You have to set firm limits, because both strong-willed and sensitive children and anxious children, all of them need to know the world is a predictable place. Strong-willed children seem like they want all the power. They don't. The reason they're strong-willed is because they feel chaotic and they want things to go a certain way. That's just the way they cope with it. So when we are predictable and strong, they actually feel much better. But we also have to be what I call safe. So we're strong and we're safe to our kids. That's how we become a powerful positive influence.
Which I feel is hard when you say that. Like, it's like obviously I'm moving towards that, but it feels like sometimes you can't be
do both. Right.
Which is interesting, because it feels like the masculine and feminine energy combining, it feels like that perfect balance of like, I'm going to care about you, but also set limits. And I think historically, we've only seen one or the other.
Correct. I agree. And people assume that, gentle parenting is the other. It's the let's be nice. Let's make them feel safe. But that's actually safety in part. Like I said, is predictability and strength. That's what makes kids feel safe. So there is this misconception, maybe that's what I should have started with, that we can't be both strong and safe at the same time. But that's exactly what I teach. And often, honestly, it's just our tone and our energy. Like, saying, hey, it's time to clean up in more of a lighthearted way, but you're going to follow through and make sure they clean up. So you're not saying, it's time to clean up. I told you a million times. You're saying, hey, it's time to clean up. We're going to do it now. And then knowing what they need in order to be successful. And that's strong and safe at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is a good point. And I would love your advice on this. Because I think I do a lot of drive-by requests, like, hey, let's clean up, and then I'm going to go do something else. And my kids are 5 and 3, and I feel like I need to be with them. I need to either help them or like, I think that's the follow through. That's what that feels like instead of, because if I say it and then they're not going to do it, then the tone gets higher.
Exactly. And what this is actually something that I teach when I talk about setting limits, is that a 3 and 5-year-old are physically capable of cleaning, but they haven't mastered the executive functioning skills to clean on their own yet. So I actually just did a training in my membership this morning about this, where I was saying that these executive functioning skills are what allow them to start the task. They'll have trouble with what we call task initiation. To stay on track with something is boring, that's an executive functioning skill that most, even adults, we struggle with. And then to notice they're getting off task. They don't even notice. So they don't have the executive functioning skills. And that's often why we get frustrated. We don't teach them those executive functioning skills. Then they don't do it. We get mad. They feel bad. And that's a cycle that so many families are in. Executive functioning skills strategies are like magic and gold, because then you can do the drive-by once they've mastered those skills, but not until then.
Yeah. I mean, everything you're talking about is also at probably everyone's bedtime routine.
Yeah. Same thing. All executive functioning skills.
Yeah. My daughter has a whole list of to-dos before she gets into that bed. You know what I mean?
Of course
and
she
it's
does.
like,
there's something that I call the avoider brain. This relates to executive functioning skills.
Yeah.
Whenever something's uncomfortable, our kids' avoider brain is so strong and so smart and so proficient. They will avoid as much as they can. And often we're so tired, we just give in. And that strengthens the avoider brain.
Yes.
So Yeah.
Yes. And I think every child is so unique in the same household. You know, my daughter is more like that. And my son is more like, okay, mom, like I'm going to do it. Probably because he's so sensitive and doesn't want me to blow up, you know?
Right. Exactly.
Which I'm like, oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, so good. Okay, let's start off. I think we want to get into the nitty gritty of like, we talked about kids with big emotions, how we react, all the things. So let's figure out like, what are 3 tips that you can give parents that they can start today?
Okay, so I'm going to give the 3 tips, and then I assume you'll just ask me questions if you want to know a little bit more about them.
Okay.
My first tip is, if we want to handle situations better in the moment, is we have to learn how to stop seeing our kids' emotions as a threat. So again, I could tell you how to do that. I'll give you some tips. So stop seeing them as a threat, because they're not, and then that'll keep us from jumping into that water with them, as we talked a little bit about in part 1. The second tip is that we can actually teach our kids how to respect their emotions without letting them control their emotions. And there's a step-by-step process that I teach for doing that as well. And the last tip is that often we as parents say, but Rachel, I don't even know how to do this. I don't know how to not let my emotions control me. So one of the things I always say is we want to do this with our kids. We want to, most of us don't know how to do this. So let's do it with them. There's a statement I'm going to talk about. It's called a when, then, until statement. Let's learn when, then, until statements with our kids, because not only does it make them feel more normal, but it's also a great connection, and it brings our family to the next level. So those are my tips.
Yes, I love that. And I think, again, what we kind of alluded to in part 1, but that this is like a family change. This is like a family healing moment. This is a family like restructuring that is foundational. Like everybody should know this, everybody should be taught this. And again, I think for our generation, we're trying to like switch so many things, and there's just so many things out there. But I think your tips feel very concrete, easy. And again, like you're very like to the point too. Like there's like, okay, try this, this, and this. There's room for obviously experiences around that. But it feels good to have like direction.
Yes. That's what I like. I always say, a lot of parents do compliment me on that. They'll say, thank you for giving me a step-by-step plan. And I say, you're welcome. But honestly, that's just my brain. That's what I want someone to say. Do this. And then I want someone to be able to, if it doesn't work, I want to be able to go back to them. So that's kind of what I provide, because that's the way my brain works. I'm going to be honest. So Thank you for that compliment. But it just comes from my own anxiety, probably. Tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yes, but I think we need that. We need that as parents, that containment around that step-by-step process. I've noticed, I think for my own experiencing in parenting, so we talked about like my first reaction is anger, and I've been changing that. And again, I think you said it was like tone is very important. So I've been changing my tone, but it's interesting to see my youngest sensitive kid, my boy, still kind of respond in a little bit of a panic. Like he's like, okay, mama, like, okay, yeah, okay. Like, you can kind of hear it. And I'm just still like, okay, but I'm lowering my voice. Like, and so I think there's something really heartbreaking about that as a parent, but it also just feels good. And I'm just wondering, will that kind of shift for him in some way in his response, or I don't even need to look for a shift in him, in that maybe I'm just, in the way that I'm regulating myself, it's kind of passing over to him. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. And the answer is both. So you said, is that going to change, or should I stop looking for it to change? Both.
Yeah.
It will change when a couple of things happen very quickly, when he needs a lot more evidence. Fear is so primal in our brains. If we are afraid, like if someone gets bitten by a dog when they're like 5, when they're 18, they're still going to have that initial, because our brain encodes fear because we're survival based. When that happens, and then when he learns a new way to deal with discomfort, that'll change. So that will change for him. However, in the meantime, because that may take a little while, that's exactly where we have to stop seeing that as a threat. It's okay that he goes like this. Doesn't mean you're a failure as a mom. It doesn't mean that he's always going to be like that, or that his relationships will be horrible. We have to stop seeing it as a threat. That's the truth, because then we'll get them there faster when we don't see it as a threat.
Yes. I love that. And again, it's just so parent focused, right? Like when we can shift something within ourselves then it does translate to our children.
It truly, truly does. I mean, the number of times I hear that from the parents I work with, they say, our whole house is different, because we start with parents. Our whole house is different, and I haven't even started working with my kids.
Yeah.
And that's because we do, going back to this whole family system, we do impact things. And I hate that about parenting. I'm going to be fully honest. I don't want it.
It's a big bummer.
Yes, I don't want to be so, influential in my kids' emotions, because I'm highly sensitive, but that is the way it is. So there's good news, because that means it's also in our control. But we're not failures if we're not happy all the time. We're not failures. That's what all of us think. I'm a failure. I feel so guilty. We're not failures.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm wondering, like, what parents say is their breaking point when they come to you. I'll tell you mine.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think the breaking point is probably when they fear what's going to happen to their kids in the future, where they say, I've tried this on my own, I'm not seeing progress, and now I'm afraid that XYZ. That's probably where most parents are, because they're listening to me sometimes, although some people listen to one podcast and they're in my membership, but some are listening for a couple months to a year, and then they're like, okay, I've tried all the things on my own, and now I really need, someone who sees this all the time, every day for a living, to help me, because I'm afraid that XYZ.
Yeah. And I think that outside perspective is so helpful when we try to do things. And I think that's a good thing, is like, try it on your own, try some strategies, see what lands, and then notice where you're getting stuck, because we all need that kind of guide sometimes to just give you a bump up, or like give you a different perspective of things.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the case. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I had that same fear, I think, for my daughter. I like flash forward to high school, and I was so sad about our relationship. I was like, this cannot be, I'm getting teary. This cannot be like war at home. Like and she's like 3 and 4 at this time. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm like, I want to feel in control, and I want something better. And again, when you can find spaces and places that validate your experience, it just feels like, okay, I'm not crazy. There isn't something wrong with me, but this combo isn't great. Like, and I don't like it, and there's a lot of things I think for parents, like, I don't like the way I'm responding to this, because I can't change. I think it maybe starts with like, oh, my kid, I got to change this behavior. And then you sit longer and you're like, I got to change mine.
Yeah. Yeah,
Ugh.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It is. And a lot of us feel, we assume that we are a failure because I'm afraid of our relationship in high school. I've done something to we just, as parents, we like put it all on us. And I always say that's basically like saying, if you're not good at algebra, but no one's taught you algebra, then saying I'm a failure because I don't know algebra, but no one's taught you. Like, our parents generally did not teach us how to do this stuff. They didn't. So we know what we don't want to do, but we don't know what we do want to do. So we need a little help figuring that out. Doesn't mean we're a failure.
Yes, I think you just named the trouble with our generation in parenting, is we know what we don't want to do, but we're like flying at the seat of our pants of what we think we should do, right?
Exactly.
And I think, again, that structure that you give is just so helpful, of like, here's plug and play this because it works.
Yeah. Or I help you figure out why it doesn't. That's the thing. I mean, every child is so unique. But when we try this, and one of the strengths I will say that I have, and I'm not good at everything, but one of the strengths I do have is, if something doesn't work, I can ask like 3 or 4 questions, and then I can tell you exactly what to do instead, just because I've been doing this for so long. So it's, again, just that idea of, okay, this didn't work for my child. There's a reason, and we'll figure it out. Again, let's not see it as a problem or a threat. That's what helps us move. That's what helps us get unstuck, I would say.
Yeah. I love that. So teaching kids of like how to control an emotion, like how young can you start with that? And like, what does that look like?
Yes. A great question. So you can actually start from very young. You can start from pre-verbal, believe it or not. You're just doing a lot more of the talking and the modeling when they're really young. So again, this puts a little bit of pressure on us, but our kids from the day they're born are sensing our emotions and things like that. So if we're regulating ourselves, we're modeling that. What does it look like when things aren't going our way? What are they seeing? What's the energy they're feeling? Because a 1-day-old can feel our energy, and they're supposed to feel our energy. Actually, they're connected to that. So, and then modeling through words. So I teach something called a when, then, until statement, which is basically how we make sure our emotions don't control us. Well, we can use some of these words out loud even when our kids aren't old enough, because very honestly, emotional regulation for young kids is mostly us, but we can be talking about it out loud. They can't regulate themselves until, I would say 3-4 years old, they're going to start to do a better job. But before that, they're going to struggle with it.
Yeah.
But we can be talking it out loud. Then as they get older, we can teach them their own when, then, until statements.
Yeah. Can you give an example of that?
Yes. So a when, then, until statement is basically where we are, and we have to do some proactive work, but I'll tell you what the statement is, where we are making a plan outside of the moment for how we'll handle something uncomfortable. So when I feel frustrated, I will go to the furthest wall and push on it as hard as I can until I no longer want to yell at my mom. So it's a plan that we make that helps us identify the feeling or the situation, that helps us figure out how to calm ourselves down, which is all about safety. And then until we can do the behavior that's going to lead to a better outcome. So that's in a nutshell a when, then, until statement.
I love that. And that's obviously done when you are in a regulated place where you're like having a conversation around that.
Yes. So what I teach is there's like the in the moment plan, which is just all about regulation.
Yeah.
And then there's the outside of the moment plan where we're teaching kids how to handle what I call their yuck. Yuck is what I call a big feeling, an uncomfortable feeling, handling their yuck and learning the skills that they need, the executive functioning skills that they need. We do that out of the moment.
So in the moment, are you talking to them about that statement? Are you, or, yeah, okay, great. Because that would annoy that
once
kid.
Someone is what I call in yuck, you don't want to talk very much. You don't want to do very much. You let them do what I call traveling the yuck curve. Basically, their yuck is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. And we have to just let them go through that process. The more we try to change the process or address their behavior, the longer it's going to take for them to get out of yuck, actually. In the moment parenting is about regulation and safety. That's it. Because they get out of that place more quickly when they feel safer. And this doesn't mean we're condoning their behavior, none of that. Well, what if my child's being disrespectful? We're not condoning any of that. We just can't address it in the moment.
Right. Because they aren't even regulated enough to understand that.
Correct.
And neither are you.
Correct. We can't communicate. They can't hear in the moment.
Yes, exactly. Which is such a an ingrained feeling or an ingrained DNA reaction, I think, for a lot of parents of that disrespect, or when the scream gets to a certain pitch, it is like a trigger for me. But totally. That's my own dysregulation.
That's exactly what it is. Your fight or flight response has kicked in. And our fight or flight response will kick in to certain things based on our biology, like our sensory inputs, but also the way we were raised. So remember, I was talking about, I think this was in part 1, I was talking about when we learn something from our past that this is dangerous. Without our awareness, our fight or flight response kicks in because we see something that we learned from our past. So whenever our fight or flight response kicks in, that's dysregulation right there. So we need to understand what our triggers are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which in the scheme of parenting, you're going to find out a lot of them.
Yes, you are.
I think with every stage, right? There's there's something new that's triggering me here, right? Or this new example, or this new way that they're talking back, or whatever it is, right?
It's true that it's new, but I will say this just to make
similar,
so we all calm down. There are also patterns. And I find when I work with families and they say, everything upsets me, there are usually only 4 or 5 things, no matter how old your child is. It just looks different. So disrespect changes, or the sensory input changes. But it's my child's disrespecting me. It gets loud. Every parent just has usually a few triggers.
Yes. I love that. I don't think I'm a highly sensitive person. I don't know. I think I would know, right?
Probably. And it's only 25% of the population that's highly sensitive.
Okay.
So.
But I do feel that overstimulation very quickly. And I think a lot of mothers do that as well. Even just in the younger stages of parenting, of just being so physical and just loud. And but I think that's what you're talking about as far as a pattern, right? A pattern of overstimulation might be one of them.
Yes, that's exactly right. Being getting overstimulated, or we get triggered by a certain behavior by our kids when they roll their eyes or when they have a certain tone. But all that tends to fall into disrespect. So when I actually sit down with parents who are totally overwhelmed by everything that triggers them, I say, write it all down. We're going to categorize it. And there are just a few categories that tend to trigger you over and over. And then so empowering when we know that, because then we can make a plan for each one.
Yeah. And then I think probably the third step, what you're talking about is resilience, is that like that empathy for that reaction, that kindness for the reaction. Like if you can imagine yourself younger and having those reactions, because you did.
You did. That's
You
right.
did. And now
Yeah.
you're adults. And so like, yeah, I just think when we can model resilience for ourselves or empathy for ourselves, that goes a long way for our children.
Yeah. And if you want a really practical way to do that, one of the things I teach parents is just to shift the tone you use with yourself. So let's say, Jen, you got angry. Instead of saying, why did I get angry again? Which is like dripping with judgment, just change it to curious. Why did I get angry? So it's so easy to switch from judgment to compassion and understanding. And that honestly is what leads to solutions. If you judge yourself, why did I get angry? There are no solutions there. There's just, I'll beat myself up. But if you switch to why did I, then it's like, oh, I got angry because I was in sensory overload. I had done all this stuff for my daughter and she didn't appreciate it. There's a solution to all of that. So this is a quick way to have a little more compassion for ourselves rather than, getting frustrated with ourselves.
Yeah. And what ages do you typically work with?
So I tend to work with parents of children aged 3 to 12.
Okay.
Especially in my membership. But because I was a therapist for teens, if they're parents of olders, I tend to help them modify. But my membership, the content is mostly for 3 to 12.
Do you see certain ages that they come where it feels maybe like typically out of control, or they're like at a certain stage or developmental stage that feels?
I would say that I started 3 because that's where, or maybe, 3 or 4 is where parents are starting to say, okay, they're supposed to have these big things when they're 2, but as they're getting a little bit older, it seems like a lot. So they'll come to me then, but a lot of parents of teens still do come to me because it's like, okay, they should be out of this by now. So I really have the whole range, but I love 3 to 12 because it's like, we don't have that much to undo with teenagers. I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of undoing that has to happen before we can move forward. But we're in that sweet spot of, younger kids. We can create a really strong foundation.
Yeah. Yes. Those foundational skills. And I think it's also important to, when you talk about having those foundational skills early, and I don't know why I thought of this, but I just felt like when you validate your kids' emotions, and if it's maybe not culturally appropriate in families or in extended families or other things, and I think it's like that parenting for the long game. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I call it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm like, well, that's not mine.
Yeah, no, that's what I call it, the long game.
Yes,
yeah.
Which I think is so important to keep in the back of our minds and remind ourselves, like, this is for those future fears, like you talk about all the time, and that in the moment, it's not going to be this, I don't know, it's just not going to be, you kind of have to undo this rightness or this like perfect scenario of either my kid's not going to have a big emotion, or it's not going to get overstimulated or not going to get loud. But that aftermath is so powerful for you and for them and for their future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. We have to remember that in the moment, there's a quote I love. It's something like, in the moment of crisis, what's that? The quote that's on the mirror, things appear bigger than they are, or objects in the mirror, whatever that quote is. But it's basically, in a crisis, things appear bigger than they actually are. So we have to remember that in the moment. That's why we have to really train ourselves out of allowing our fight or flight response to blow everything out of proportion, because that's what it's trained to do. We can untrain our brain and we can have a different reaction, which is honestly what we're teaching our kids to do. What I teach parents is the same process as what we're teaching our kids, honestly. So we have to stop seeing it as this big, huge crisis. Great. So our kids can stop doing that.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more personal parenting question for you. What do we do when our kids don't want our help? So my son, when he gets really sad about something and he'll say, I'm not being your best friend anymore, he's very sweet. He'll run to his room and want to be alone, quote unquote alone. I don't know if he actually wants that, but that's what he does. And then my daughter is a very strong no. Like it's softened for her, but I feel like that's still maybe a little bit of an instinct. And I think about high school, which is also developmentally appropriate for her to be like, I don't want to talk to you. But can you give me some insight? I mean, I think there's my reaction to that of like, oh, I can't soothe you, and that's really hard for me. But I'm just curious of what is happening for them in that moment. And am I a bad parent?
Don't we all end up there?
It's
I'm
so
a bad
hard.
parent. This is my fault. It's so like,
hard.
I love talking about this in my membership, and I do talk about this because almost every single one of us ends up there. It's either
like
there's something wrong with me or there's something wrong with my kid.
Yes.
So we all end up, and that's not true, either one, but we all do. So I'm so glad you are acknowledging that you have those fears too.
Yeah.
So I will say that some kids like to be alone. I like to be alone. When I that's exactly what I need. When I am having these big emotions, first I need to like verbally vomit it out, and then I need to be alone. So some kids, like I have a feeling your son genuinely needs that. And if I say that to you, does that resonate? That he genuinely needs that?
It's very like right after it's like he starts to get teary and he runs to his room.
Yeah. So he may actually just need space.
Okay.
And then when kids don't need space, but they're taking space or they're saying no, it could be a couple of things. It could be that that's their natural, what I call yuck response. So my natural response when I have yuck is to push people away. And it's not personal against you. I could just push people away. That's kind of the fight part. Now, in some circumstances, kids are going to say, I don't want you to be here because I don't feel safe with you. And that's not a reflection necessarily on us as parents. Maybe it is. But sometimes it's just, you told me no, I couldn't have an extra dessert. And right now you are not safe to me. Yeah, I'm pissed at you because you're the one that caused that. And this happens often when a child is hurting, they want to hurt the other person. There's nothing wrong with your child.
Physical or emotional. Yeah.
Physical or emotional. Because it's like the human brain is wired to say, I don't want to hurt alone. If I'm hurting, I want you to be in it with me. Yeah. So there's possibly a part where she's mad at you and she wants you to hurt too. So again, there's kind of this spectrum of, I really do need to be alone, to this is just my yuck response. I'm in yuck and I'm just saying move away. And then maybe there is some, I don't feel safe with you with my yuck. So parents may fall in one of those, on somewhere on that spectrum. And any of those things we can address. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's, I think what you're helping me with is just being more curious about it. Because
that's key.
Yeah. And almost like experiment.
Yes, curiosity versus judgment. Yeah. Curiosity leads to solutions. Judgment leads to more yuck.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, Rachel, I could talk to you for hours. Can you tell us more about your membership, how people can get in, all the things, because I'm enrolling today.
You're so sweet. So yeah, my membership is called Raising Resilience. And as I said, it has those three components. Basically, you come in, there's a curriculum. However, I am someone who, and my business coaches, I have all these people trying to help me with my business, say, Rachel, you're too hands-on. I love being hands-on. So it's not only the curriculum, which people can go through alone, but I offer also lots of support. My favorite thing is to kind of get to know people in the membership and help them modify the curriculum because it is a generalized curriculum. So it's the videos, and then I also do live Q&As. I actually do them 8 times a month. So again, everyone's like, don't give them so much, but I love doing it. So I do live Q&As. I teach live classes just to make sure that every piece of the curriculum is clear so people can come, and I'm going to teach it and say, what don't you understand? So it's really those 3 pieces that I mentioned before. So regulate ourselves, set limits, foster resilience, and then Rachel, getting to know you and your family and helping you out. That's the membership. So it's on my website, rachel-bailey.com. You'll see there's the Raising Resilience membership. That's really what it is. And I feel so grateful to be able to bring families to this place of chaos and confusion and depletion to peace and resilience.
Yes. Yes. You've helped us so much. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. And then tell us a little bit about your podcast as well.
So my podcast is called Your Parenting Long Game. And in the membership, I actually teach what I call the long game method. And so I used to focus on general parenting, but at episode 200, I actually switched. And that's actually all that's live now anymore. 200 on is where I talk about raising kids with big emotions. So it's almost every aspect of raising kids with big emotions. They're short episodes, hopefully practical, helping you think about things differently, helping you know what to do. So that's Your Parenting Long Game.
Yes, awesome. And lastly, you made a course for the How We Get Through app. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I love what you and I talked about, this concept of raising resilience. But here's the sweet spot of that course is how do we do it in a way that fosters healthy self-esteem? As I said in the very beginning, the way we learn to foster resilience is really has a negative impact on kids with big emotions. And one of the things I found as a therapist was that pretty much all kids who had big emotions that came to me, which was a lot of my clients, felt really bad about themselves. And that was exacerbating all these symptoms. So it is possible to foster both resilience and healthy self-esteem.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I talk about there. How do we help kids manage their emotions in a way that builds their confidence and their belief in their worth? That is my life's goal and life's passion. So I love the course and How We Get Through.
Yes. Oh, Rachel, you're the best. I love it. You've been so
you.
healing for me in a lot of ways. And I just love always getting teary with you. I'm like, tell me I'm not a bad mom. But it just feels so hard sometimes. And I can imagine in that Q&A that you have in your membership to see other parents and then hear someone ask the same question. Even just you describing my children to a T, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
That is like I don't know. I just feel so less alone and normalized because I don't necessarily always feel that in my friend groups or in the family. And I think I'm always just trying to do something a little bit different, or I just feel like they are different, and I want to celebrate their differences and care for them and also make them feel better about themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really healing. A lot of people want to work with me one-on-one. I'm like, no, you don't. You want to be in the group because it is so healing to realize your child is not the only one doing this. You are not the only parent wondering, am I a horrible parent? We are all in this together.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And lastly, where can we find you on social?
So the place I show up the most is actually on Facebook. I have a Facebook group that goes with my podcast. It's called Your Parenting Long Game Podcast Community. I am on Instagram, but not as much, I'll be honest.
That's all right.
And then I am on TikTok as well.
Oh.
I'm very fortunate to have someone who helps me with that. That's not my native place to be, but I do have a lot of videos there. And then YouTube, I also have a channel on there. So I do lots of videos. Yeah. That's kind of my thing. And so you can kind of find me more live in the Facebook group and then YouTube, and then the videos on Instagram and TikTok.
Girl, you busy. Well,
those are repurposed. It's one video that goes to all places, so I don't do all the time.
Yes, so good. Thank you so much, Rachel. You're the best, and we should have you on again. Let's do this again.
Thank you. I would love it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
We're so thankful that you chose to listen to us and our show and support us as we hope to support you. It really means the world to us. If you loved what you heard today, we would so appreciate it if you would give us a review on Apple Podcasts. And this just helps us create more content and spaces for all of us to heal. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.